Welcome to Future Ready Live, where we talk about topics that will help CPAs and their organizations prepare for change and transformation. Today, we're going to be talking about the new book out. In fact, I just got my copy this week, Nancy, called Leadering. The Ways Visionary Leaders Play Bigger. I love that idea of playing bigger. And so with me is Nancy Giordano, author of this thing. She's a strategic futurist, global keynote speaker. I love this, a gatherer, author of this book. And I met Nancy at the Digital Association Conference, Digital Now, back, I guess it was in December, right? November, December. And I got to be on a panel with Nancy. So Nancy, say hi to everybody.
Hello, everyone. Great to see you.
So first of all, I love the book. I think I'm about all the way through it. And of course, I had all my notes from when we were last together. But I want to talk about why. What made you write this book now? And I love your entry, but tell everybody, the audience, why'd you write this book?
Yeah, again, I am a strategist more than I am even a speaker. I love being able to go and help organizations and teams and industries think about their path moving forward and actually build that roadmap. And what I found is I went in because I got to go, I get to live on the horizon. I get to live with all the people who are out there building the future, the technologists, the scientists, and engineers, the designers, the entrepreneurs, and bring that thinking back. We often found a lot of resistance inside existing frameworks, existing organizations. And I one day wrote on a Post-it note, I wanted to create the Institute for Accelerated Understanding. Like, how can we get people to think about this faster so we can start to build the things that need to be built? Like, I want to go build. I don't want to spend all this time trying to explain. And as I got closer and closer to that work, I realized it's really about how we think. We got to really change our mindset. I can talk about artificial intelligence all day long. I can talk about the future of work. We can talk about the future of accounting. We can talk about all these things. But unless you really change the way you think and the way you hold risk and the way you organize resources, we'll keep running into the same roadblocks. So this book is designed to take us on a shift from what I call leadership, which is an outdated industrial era mindset, into what I would call leadering, which is preparing us for the 21st century productivity revolution we're right at the precipice of.
I love that. It's funny because a lot of the concepts you talk about are things that we've used to try to shift mindsets in our profession. That's one of the journeys we're on right now. In order to transform them, you have to start with the mindset. I love that. Tell us about what you just said about the idea of the mindset risk notion, because I think that's important, at least for a lot of the folks in our profession. Tell us what you mean by that.
I think it is, across the board, but specifically in highly regulated or highly, financial oriented ones, but it goes across the board. The idea is, and you could probably even flesh it out, it'd be fun to have this conversation, but my perspective is that we've built all of our structures in the 20th century to protect us and keep us safe in ways that now are creating vulnerability. So things like silos, right? We put things into silos, either information into silos or people into silos to keep it efficient and to make sure that things, didn't run over into other things and everything could be done. And this productivity mandate that is now actually, when you do any work in artificial intelligence or anything that's to do with trying to create a systems solution to something, that runs into completely counter to that. It just doesn't work. The fact that we would outsource all of our big decision making to the people who have the most experience, right? The C-suite or the board. And what we're really finding is now that people who are on the edge, the people who are actually collecting and sensing, responding to real information all day long, are the people who have really huge insight that we should be both listening to and to some extent, as much as we can, enabling them to be able to make decisions in real time. Things like making really incremental improvements. That was the constant incremental, and now we're actually in a move where we're going to have to take really big, audacious leaps forward, and we have to have courage to go do that. So again, that's why I just say is I think the way that we defined risk in the past is outdated, and there's actually all these behaviors I'm just describing are actually the things that keep us safe now.
Interesting. So bold, audacious, like big steps, not incremental. All those are now.
So it's again non-siloed. It's being much more connected and networked. We used to think that would make us too dependent upon each other. Now we're realizing interdependence is actually really critical, right? Shared learning, shared innovation, all these shared resources are actually the key. And actually, what we're also seeing is non-centralized is key. The more distributed we can be, the more resilient we can be. And the more on the edge that we can be, more, again, sensing, responding as close to the point of impact, the more responsive and the more useful and the more agile and, all those other things that we want to be. So it's just flipping so much of our behavior and our way of thinking from the past that worked. It worked in the 20th century industrial era, right? We built big, huge, strong brands and huge companies that were able to scale all over the world. We were able to have, deliver consistent profitability month after month, quarter after quarter. But the game has changed now. It's a different landscape.
So one of the things you talked about a lot of the research you cited and stories, Thomas Friedman and the whole invention of the 2007 and what happened when Steve Jobs held up this device,
right?
And your whole Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, Fourth Industrial Revolution. You changed the story on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, right? Tell everybody what you use for that. Instead of 4IR, you say
1PR. You're a good student. And it's funny, I just had this conversation with someone this morning who'd been doing work with the World Economic Forum. So I just think that this goes back to the mindset thing. We can't just say we're another, era in what is an industrial era thinking. We're actually post-industrial, or what I call the exponential productivity revolution. And I would say we're in the first wave of the productivity revolution, so I call it the 1PR. So it sort of sticks into that nomenclature, but it is just a completely different physics when we start talking about exponential technologies that are probabilistic, that work in a really different way, that are actually rooting out for complexity and for uncertainty, because that's where you can find some answers to questions that we've never been able to answer before. And we're able to think again about how we organize ourselves. We're actually end up much more distributed systems at some point as we move forward. So, what we find, if you look through, there's a chart in there, a little graphic that we created, right, that shows how the technology connected to sort of business structures across each one of those first three eras, and how the same thing will be when we take this big leap over to the productivity era. And then there's a bunch of stats around the productivity stuff, right? I can 3D print a house now for $7,000 that normally cost $150,000 to print.
Yeah.
And we can just go on and on about all the ways these technologies are driving much more robust delivery of productivity, which I think is exciting and great.
There's no question about that. But back to that new mindset. So let me go one more thing that I thought was fascinating when you spoke at the Digital Now. The notion that you said, when you look at all this, we're really only 1% in. That blew me away. So what is that? What do you mean by that?
Well, again, when I was talking earlier about the people that I get to go and hang out with, that little group, not just that extraordinary group of thinkers and builders on the edge, and you ask them, how far along we are. We were at Google's headquarters a couple of years ago for a future retail event, and they were talking about that we're 1% into what will be, e-commerce / the future of commerce. You go and talk to a 3D printer or an additive printing manufacturing, ask how far along we are, they say 1%. Like, wow, we keep hearing this word 1%. And one could argue that, during this past year, we have become a bit more adaptive and, a bit more adept with this. But I would say we've increased penetration of current technologies. We haven't actually seen the big explosion in innovation that's going to happen as a result of this experience. Like everyone talks about that we've accelerated 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever that word is, in both our adoption and I think what we will see in terms of brand new solutions, because we're seeing all the gaps that exist now and all the opportunities that we have to move forward. So we, as part of the launching of the book, we just recently did a series of 8 conversations, like each day for half an hour. I would talk through a chapter in the book, and then we would punctuate it with particular, what I call pinkers, people you need to know. And we had Stephen Kotler on the other day talking about the internet-sized opportunities that exist when you see the convergence. This is what really the article Tom Friedman talked about in 2007. It wasn't just the phone. It was all these other things that happened at the same time that made that revolution possible, and then made all these industries shift. The value that was created and destroyed, when you start thinking about every single industry that was impacted by mobile and social and the cloud. So now you move into where we are now, and Stephen will say we've got 14 internet-sized opportunities just waiting there to be realized. 14 internet-sized opportunities.
Because of all the convergence and reshifting and all those types.
I say there's in the book I outline 10 technologies. In his book, The Future's Faster Than You Think, I think they may have 14 technologies. And then there's some, like, again, you take this plus this and suddenly it becomes something else again. And so the minimum he thinks is 14. I'll say, certainly at least 10. But there's the idea is, again, that they will both advance and converge. And so as they advance and converge, and then they change sectors. And so he gave an example, again, when he was with I forgot who it was, like a big entertainment company years ago. And we talked about entertainment meets healthcare. Suddenly that becomes a whole different way of thinking about delivering healthcare. When I start to play a game for something, or I take in content that will somehow boost my brain or reduce my stress or allow whatever it is that I'm trying to, heal. And so we're going to see a lot more overlap of industries and sectors and solutions.
That's incredible. And the speed just keeps accelerating, right? Which is what you're saying.
Yeah, and so there are big questions that we have to ask ourselves as we go through that, because one of the big questions is, how do humans level up to be able to match that? And so it's actually interesting. He's written now a companion book that just came out called The Art of the Impossible, because he feels like there's really an important piece where I talk about it from a human cloud perspective, like from a communal perspective, socially, how do we ensure that we level up? He talks about it literally from an individual performance perspective. How do we get into performance states and flow states, and use neuroscience to help us figure out how to be able to hold this kind of complexity in our brains? And he feels like so much of us is, we're getting in our own way. Yeah. And there are ways that we can, learn to prepare better for this and navigate better in this.
Reminds me of the movie The Matrix, right? When they used to stick those things in your head, and all of a sudden, boom, you could fly down.
That's why, it's funny because, again, we always talk about science fiction becomes this really interesting kind of call to the technologies we want to try and build that. And so we're seeing a lot of conversations right now about neural implants or brain-computer interfaces, and trying to figure out if that's the way we do it. So some people are trying to solve it through the, actual implant. He's trying to do it more through our own cognitive capacity to be able to get into flow states. And he has this thing called the Flow Collective Research Project that he's involved in, and thinks about extreme athletes and all these people who, once one person broke the minute-mile barrier, like everyone was able to do that. Like what happens with that? And so what are other ways that we can sort of hack our own psychology? And I think about it again internally. How do we build more social structures that hold us better? How do we coordinate better? How do we contribute better? How do we care for each other better in ways that we can level up? And I will argue, consciousness is a big word, but this idea of trusting our intuition, getting clear about what our own goals and values are, aligning that stuff better, like we're going to realize that actually is a really critical component to being able to deliver these technological solutions that we think we need.
Yeah, so it gets more into like values and purpose and all of those squishy things, right, to help guide you when you don't have any rule books.
Well, so then you see, the metaphor that I use in here is about the compass and the North Star. And so the idea is, if you don't have a map anymore, how are you going to navigate? Because the map is outdated. Well, if I hand you a compass and I teach you how to use a compass, it's actually not so scary. Then I'm in terrain that I can at least know how to navigate. But the question is, what am I navigating to? And that's why a North Star becomes so important. Your individual purpose, again, over and over again, Tom, I get to have these interviews and these conversations with people all day long inside Unilever, inside, I talked to John Hagel the other day. I mean, there's not, everybody we talk to is sort of zeroing in on your individual purpose, being your own particular guide, and then corporate or organizational purpose. Singularity University will talk about a massively transformative purpose. The ability to solve a problem for 1 billion people or more is really what it is that we have at our, this is the power that's being given to us. There's another podcast I heard the other day with Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote 21st Lesson for the 21st Century and Sapiens and Homo Deus. And then named Tristan Harris, who started the Center for Humane Technologies and was a former ethicist at Google. And they were having this long 2-hour podcast about this whole thing. And I can't remember who said this, but one of them said, we have Paleolithic brains operating inside medieval structures being given godlike power now. Just like you try and like
mind blowing,
right? This is the idea. But the fact is that we will, somehow I trust humans very much to be able to meet the demands of the day. So
the idea of trust, collaboration, taking care of each other, that helps pull that, again, throwing that with the purpose and those kind of things. Now, the other concept I loved in there was the idea of this liminal gap.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, because that was
again, I'm just trying to find, these are all things that we sense on some level, right? All I'm trying to do is name them and help us all understand that this is happening and give us a shared vocabulary around it. So the idea is, if you have old systems that are breaking down, right, old industrial ones that are no longer going to work, including thinking about work and the fact that we work 40 hours a week in a 9-to-5 kind of schedule, because that's the way we used to do it on the assembly line, right? And we end up in this new world that is going to be productivity driven, and it's going to be about creativity and innovation and collaboration. It requires a really different way of working. So we have old systems breaking down, new systems yet to be created. We've got this gap in between that we don't fully understand how to navigate. And we call it the liminal gap between, because liminal means the space between, right? Now and next, what we know, what's unfamiliar. And the question becomes, how do we jump that gap, right? How do we, again, build the capacity and the courage and the confidence and the skills to be able to navigate that? And, you look at the Fry's Electronics, the We'll just go through all the ones that didn't make it through the liminal gap and weren't able to innovate enough or prepare well enough. And then if you look at the ones on the other side, like Netflix, they're constantly in a place of innovation. They don't just like get to the other side and be like, okay, we cracked that. Right? They're still in there, always trying to figure out where it is that they're going. And the fact that they won so many, Golden Globes, it just shows that they recognize how important they saw the writing on the wall that having, content that wasn't licensed for them or wasn't created by them was not going to be a sustainable strategy. So they're always somehow have built a way of being able to stay a step ahead or to stay relevant. So the question is, again, how do you build that capacity to be able to jump that gap and be on that side of constant innovation? And that's why, again, leadering is a verb. It's designed to be able to support constant innovation and constant experimentation to be able to get to stay successfully,
that really resonated, the whole idea of that leadering as a verb. All right, so now break it down to our audience. Like, where should they start? Like, what do we do Monday morning?
Again, I think partly it's everyone wants the how. Like, everyone wants a playbook, and as
That's true, they all do want the playbook.
So first thing I'll say is take a deep breath, right? Like, literally, just take a deep breath and get kind of like centered on the fact that this is the reality. And make peace with that, as opposed to constantly trying to resist that. I think it would be helpful if people just kind of, said, okay. And one of my favorite questions, there's two things in there that I love: what if and not yet. If we can live in a space of, well, what if, instead of somebody presenting what seems like an audacious or crazy or impossible idea, and you go, that will never happen. I swear this is the moment in time that we have to start asking, well, what if?
What if
right? Are we prepared if that were to happen, or what would the implications of that be, which I think are extraordinary. And then I think adopting that mindset again of not yet. When people say, well, we don't know how to do blah, 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 not yet, I haven't learned how to do that, not yet. I've heard that a couple of times during this past week from other people, how powerful that growth mindset is, that's able to, confidently take in new information and not be so rattled by it. And then the last thing I'll just say is have compassion for yourself, for your teammates, for your customers, for your partners in all domains of this. We're all going through this, and we all have different levels of being able to take in new things at different times. All of us feel at some moment like we're imposters because we're having to lead and learn simultaneously, which is really hard and not the way that we've been taught to do things. The metrics of the game are shifting around us. We all thought GDP was going to be it, and soon GDP is not going to be it. So I think just, every once in a while, like I say, taking a deep breath and having some compassion and staying really, really curious.
I love that. Well, I love that. You're right about the curiosity piece and to take a deep breath. So some amazing stuff in there. I would say if you want the playbook, go buy it. It's,
okay, I'm saying it's never a playbook. It is a list of principles, right? Or practices.
It's true.
A way of developing practices.
Exactly. It's not like step by step, but it is principles and practices that you can begin to
really give you confidence.
Yeah. So I love it. I love what you did with our association community and what you're doing here. Final thing is, so it is the beginning of International Women's Month, and you happen to be a woman futurist, which is not exactly a common thing. So how did that happen? Tell us that little bit.
Yeah, you know what? Well, and this is actually a great plug. So thank you for letting me talk about the Femme Futurist Society that we created as a result of all this. So I think it just might, people ask me how I became a futurist, and I think it's a combination of insatiable curiosity, like ridiculous curiosity, and fear of being blindsided. Like, I don't want to be blindsided. I really want to ensure that there's a safe and thriving future for all of us. I want to reduce suffering on the planet. And I really hate not knowing. Right? I want to know. So I think it's just those two things combined. And it's sort of a good time to be one because there's so much shifting and changing that I'm naturally good at being able to synthesize information and being able to connect the dots. And so if I can offer that to other people, it's a great place to be. But again, it's a strategic futurist, right? I want to build with that knowledge, not just forecast. But what we found actually is that so many women are ignored in three ways. One is history. Whenever we talk about innovation, women are never the people that you point to. I hope people know who Madam C.J. Walker is at this point, but she was the first female billionaire in the country in 1915, a Black woman, but barely people know her name. The second is in innovation, actually driving and changing the products. So very few women are in artificial intelligence or in robotics, a little bit more in virtual reality or spatial computing, but the numbers are really so far below what they need to be in order to be able to ensure that we don't have cognitive bias in any of these things. Like, we really, really need diverse thinking in these teams. And the third is in actually being able then to realize the value of this productivity. Out of the 560 IPOs that have happened recently before the CEO of Bumble so successfully IPO'd recently. Only 3 of those companies have been founded by women.
Wow.
3 out of 560. And it doesn't mean that we don't have ideas. It doesn't mean that we don't care. But often if you look at the funding, we get so little funding, right? It's much harder to break through. Everyone told Whitney that her idea for Bumble was a terrible idea. It was never going to work. And so I just think that we've got to fix a whole bunch of systems. So the whole Femme Future Society is just a collection of interviews with some of the most extraordinary women around the world who are leading this thinking, have all kinds of big ideas and frameworks for how we can get there. And so I just think being able to hear their views of the future of governance and the future of work, the future of technology is part of helping fill that gap.
Love it. We're going to definitely look at that. By the way, you all can find Nancy on Twitter at Nancy Giordano, all one word. She's on LinkedIn. She's on Instagram. I mean, she's pretty much everywhere. Buy her book, Leadering the Ways Visionary Leaders Play Bigger. And I have to close with, you used the quote by Marianne Williamson that I remember from Coach Carter. That was at least a kind of partial quote from that. So tell us that final thought.
You're playing big. You're playing small doesn't serve the world.
Yeah, go
big. That's what my company's called, Play
big.
Big. So Play Big is not about scale, right? It's about being able to bring all your resources to bear to really try and create the most, caring and impactful future for all of us. And so again, you're playing small does not serve the world. So whenever you are in doubt that you can do it, just remember that. Exactly.
So with that, everybody, you can tune in here the first and third Tuesday of every month at noon on my LinkedIn page. So with that, Nancy, thank you so much for everything you did today. This was awesome.
Great. Thank you for reading and thanks for evangelizing. Thanks for playing big.